Hi, I'm Elaine. I'm 23 and fond of traveling. My father works for a tourist company. That's why since early childhood I have visited plenty of countries and seen lots of incredible places. Once I watched a film which showed a man who traveled the world by hitchhiking. The idea was so inspiring that I decided to repeat the experience of that man and travel across the United States. It was interesting, but I also understood that it was dangerous. My parents were strongly against it because they worried that something bad could happen to me. However, my motivation was too strong, and there was hardly a person who could stop me. I packed my stuff, took all the money I had, and left home. I bought a ticket to the neighboring town and set off. The neighboring town was known as a place where truck drivers often stopped on their way to other states. So I thought it would be a great place to begin with. I came to a bar for truck drivers and looked around trying to find someone who could take me on the road. I asked a waitress who was the kindest man among the truckers, and she pointed to Winnie, a big guy with long curly hair. I sat down next to him and asked where he was going. He gave me a strict look. I wondered why everyone considered him a kind man. He kept silence for a couple of minutes, then said, "Sorry, I just need to eat this burger." I smiled at him. He was polite and his voice was very pleasant. We started talking and soon I learned that nearly half of my route coincided with his one and that he would be happy to take me with him. Our trip was amazing. Winnie liked recording funny videos and told me lots of interesting road trip stories. He bought ice cream for me in each cafe and we laughed all the way. He was really the kindest man I had ever met in my life, but Nashville was the town we had to separate. We shared our last ice cream and I continued my trip. My new companion was very quiet. Too quiet, I would say. The only thing he told me was, "Okay, you can go with me." He didn't even say what his name was, but people told me he was reliable, and in case of danger, he would do everything to save me. One day, in the middle of nowhere, we were stopped by the police. They asked the driver to show his license and the documents for the cargo. I wondered why the police were working in such a place. I asked what the problem was, and they told us to leave the cabin. The driver and I went out of the cabin. Then the policeman asked to show the cargo to them. We all came up to the container, and the driver seemed to be going to open it, but suddenly he grabbed me and put a knife to my throat. I was horrified. The police realized I was just a fellow traveler, so they could not risk my life. My new bad friend made me run with him through the step. I obeyed because he was threatening to me. He told me that the policemen were actually FBI agents who followed him. They had information that he was carrying tons of drugs in his truck. In the later afternoon, we reached the end of the moor and saw a highway. I realized my companion wanted to get away from the agents and it would be a lot easier for him to do that during the night. However, I hoped that the FBI still followed us and would save me. The man was smart and started to hitchhike. He said that he would kill me and the driver if I said anything. A couple of minutes later, a truck stopped near us, and it was the truck I had already seen. We got into the cabin, and I saw Winnie. He looked at me and gave me a wink. I realized that I had to keep silence. Early in the morning, we arrived to a small town. We stopped at a gas station. Winnie went out to pay for the fuel and asked us if we were hungry. I said I was, so we all moved to the cafe. We sat at the table and ordered food. While we were waiting, I looked around. The people in the cafe looked weird to me, tense, maybe. Suddenly, a man sitting behind me attacked our drug dealer and put handcuffs on him. I couldn't believe I was safe. As it turned out, the people in the cafe were FBI agents undercover. And Winnie helped them. As soon as he knew I was hostage, he offered his assistance to the FBI. He suggested the plan and helped to implement it. Hitchhiking was the best way for the criminal to escape, so the plan worked. I decided to return home. My adventure was amazing, but I couldn't risk my life anymore. I never told my parents about what happened to me. They were shocked about the runaway thing, and the hostage story could make them crazy. And a piece of advice from me: If you have enjoyed the video, please click the like button, leave your comments, and subscribe to our channel. My name is Julia. People say that I am weird because I can never leave an abandoned animal in the street. My parents say I took it from my grandma. She used to bring a new animal home every month. I brought home my first abandoned cat, a gray-colored helpless kitten, when I was 5 years old, and I cried a lot when my parents took it to the rescue organization. It repeated again and again. Cats, dogs, even a turtle. And my parents never agreed to let me have an animal at home. When I was 10, I found the cutest cat in the world. I called it Toby. I begged my parents to adopt it. I promised that I would take care of it and get only excellent marks at school. And, to my surprise and joy, they believed me. I really started to study better and spent all my free time with Toby. I was happy, but soon I found rash all over my body, and my eyes turned red. My dad said I got scabies from my cat. I was furious. He took Toby away and left him on the outskirts of the city. But in the evening, Toby was at home. Dad called a taxi, paid the driver lots of money, and asked to take the cat 40 kilometers away. Dad felt satisfied, but not for long. 2 days later, Toby came home again. Dad took the situation seriously. He took a day off from work and said I would never see my cat again. I began crying, but understood that I could do nothing. However, I convinced my father that I had to at least feed Toby with some delicacies. No one knew what would happen when Toby was left alone. Dad agreed. I gave Toby his favorite food and spent his last hours in our house with him. Early in the morning, my father said he would take Toby very far from our home so that he couldn't find the way to return. He put Toby into a sports bag and left. I cried the whole day, drew Toby's portrait, made a rhyme about it. I told my mother that when I grow up, I would never take pets away from my children. Mom tried to calm me down, promised to buy beautiful dolls and other toys to me, but when it got dark and Dad wasn't home, we began to worry because he left early in the morning. Mom was afraid that something could have happened. His phone was unreachable. At midnight, my mother called the police. In the morning, a few policemen came to talk to us. They asked us to tell in detail what had happened, if he had ever received odd calls, if he had any enemies or another woman he could spend time with. Mom was sure that it was something different. 2 days later, Dad was still missing. My mother and grandmother kept crying and discussing the situation, making guesses. All the versions about his disappearance seemed improbable. Suddenly, we heard someone knocking on the door. We also heard a man growling and a cat meowing. We looked at each other surprised. Mom opened the door and saw my dad. He was dirty, shaky looking, had scratches on his face and shoelace tied to his wrist and the cat's neck. Toby was fluffing and trying to get rid of the lace. We rushed to my father and tried to give him a hug, but he waved us aside and went into the kitchen. He was very hungry and thirsty, so he took the food out of the fridge and began eating with the fridge door open. The policeman asked him what had happened to him. Dad sighed, sat on the sofa, and told his story. That day, he left home early because he wanted to take Toby as far from the house as possible so that the cat could not find the way home. First, he took the bus to leave the city, then a taxi to the mountains, and then went on foot along a mountain path with Toby in the sports bag. He crossed a river and even wanted to throw the cat into the water, but felt sorry for it. So he went further. He tried to double back so that Toby could not return home. When he reached the rocks, he made a small fortress using stones around the bag with Toby. He thought that it would prevent the cat from finding the way home. When the fortress was ready, Dad moved back. Of course, he could hear the cat meowing. He walked along the path, through the woods, past a large dried tree, and turned left. He kept walking for a few miles. Then he heard the cat meowing. It turned out that the path Dad was taking led to the fortress he had built for Toby. He realized that he had taken the wrong turn near the dried tree. So he had some rest and went home. He walked along the path, through the woods, past a large dried tree, and turned right. He kept walking for a few miles, and soon approached to Toby's fortress again. He was surprised. Then he clapped his hands and heard the cat meowing. He understood the cat was still alive. Then he got some rest again, and moved home. He decided to go up the hill and see what way to go. The telephone was off the range. He even licked his finger to find out the wind direction, but then realized how silly this idea was. It was getting late. My father started a fire and laid down to have some sleep. He was hungry and saw himself eating a chicken in his dream. He woke early the next morning, did a few exercises, made an attempt to catch fish in the river, but failed. Then he went into the woods and found a few berries. He tried to find the way home, but each time he returned to Toby's fortress. During the night, he heard wolves howling and got really frightened. He recalled me, his little daughter, and his amazing wife. He climbed a tree and spent the rest of the night there. In the morning, he went down because no wolves were around and decided to kill Toby. He was angry with that cat and believed it was Toby to blame for everything. He took a large stone and dropped it into the bag. At this moment of Dad's story, the policeman said, it wasn't the best idea. The cat could help you find the way home. Dad said, yes, but when I realized that, it was too late. We continued listening to the story. Dad kept telling it. He said he was angry with himself for being so stupid when he heard the cat meowing. The bag seemed to move. My father opened the bag and saw Toby sitting in the corner, just a little way from the place where the stone was. Dad was really happy to see the cat was alive. He couldn't risk letting it go because the cat could run away and leave him alone. So he took a lace from his shoe and put it around Toby's neck, then around his wrist. This way, they both returned home. My father said that Toby came to his life to teach him a lesson. He said that it was silly to kill a cat until you got home. We all looked at him in surprise. Of course, he was kidding. He said he would take Toby to the vet. The policeman closed the case about Dad's disappearance, took a selfie with Toby, and left. This is the amazing story that happened to my father and my cat. Take care of your pets, and maybe they will save your life.
Hi, I'm Anna. As you can see, I'm not the slimmest girl in the world, but I have no problems with that. And men adore me. But it hasn't been like that all the time. You might wonder how this can be possible. I'm sure there are overweight girls you know who are either very insecure or too self-confident and sincerely believe that leggings and crop tops make them look irresistible. My secret is different though. I know that haters laugh at me and say that I threaten guys around me to eat them and all their relatives if they don't flirt with me. But it is nonsense, of course. Smart people say that you can change your life only if you overcome certain challenges. And this is what has happened to me. I used to be really shy and self-hating, but I wanted to date guys. I looked at them and thought that I would never be able to talk to any one of them. And when I dared to start a conversation, it usually turned out to be a disaster. I mumbled, sweated, my face turned red, jokes were too silly, both the guy and me felt awkward. I could see that it made me even more nervous. In such situations, I felt too humiliated and tried to stop talking and leave, or the guy left first. Finally, I got tired of living like that and I made up my mind to lose weight in any way possible. I went to the gym and read plenty of materials on diets. The most effective diet was the one that required to drink as little liquid as possible. So I decided to try it, and I chose the most intensive training program. I wanted to see changes as soon as possible. So I worked really hard. I drank very little amounts of water and the result was perfect. I didn't sweat that much any longer when I spoke to guys. It made me more confident. I believed that I was doing right, so I kept training and avoided drinking. Now I understand that I had to do things slowly to help my body adjust to changes. But I wanted to see quick results, which led me to the hospital. I had severe malnutrition and exhaustion. A week later, I gained the weight that I had lost and even a few pounds more. I looked in the mirror and felt miserable. I had worked so hard, but it wasn't worth it. I was sure I was a loser. I didn't want to live. I decided to kill myself. I stole some pills from the nurse and took them all. Then I lay on my bed and started waiting. I thought about my life, parents, relatives, friends, and suddenly realized I wasn't ready to give up, but I already had my stomach burning. I jumped up from the bed, ran out from the ward, and started shouting that I needed gastric lavage or I would die. A nurse saw me, looked at the bottle of pills that I had taken, and told the doctor that I consumed plenty of laxatives. I rushed to the toilet. On my way there, I was thinking about how stupid I was. I managed to fail even the suicide mission. I didn't stop thinking about it, though. I decided that falling from the hospital roof could be more effective. But the idea of other people watching a bloody mess on the road made me feel nauseous. Fortunately for me, doctors informed my parents about my suicide attempt, and parents hired a good psychologist for me. A week later, I no longer wanted to die. I was ready for gradual work to make my life happy. When I was discharged, parents also hired a personal trainer and a nutritionist to help me. Under their supervision, I started to see first results soon. I kept seeing the psychologist and soon we became good friends. This period of my life was very productive. I lost 24 pounds, learned to accept and love myself, bought trendy clothes that made me look gorgeous. I felt more confident and wasn't afraid to talk to people, even men. My father was glad to see that my life changed, so he decided to retire from business and start a career as a politician. I knew he dreamt of running for mayor of the city, and I was happy that the positive changes in my life would help him make his dream come true. I was rather self-confident at that time. I started to notice that guys paid a lot of attention to me. I wasn't in a hurry to begin a relationship. I flirted and loved the process. No, I wasn't slender yet, but I already knew that it was my confidence rather than appearance that mattered in these kinds of things. I stopped attending the gym because I didn't have time for it, but I continued to maintain my diet. I had many dates and enjoyed my new life. A few months later, I met a handsome guy, Bill, who also wanted to be a politician. I was sure that my father would approve him. Bill loves me and often brings flowers and candies to me. I love him too, but I do flirt with other men. I want Bill to understand that he is not the only man who is interested in me. Besides, flirting and dating are like a drug to me, a drug which I can't have enough, no matter how much I consume. Probably I still have that little insecure girl inside me. My father was elected mayor, and to celebrate the victory, he bought a car for my boyfriend, saying that he had to drive me whenever and wherever I wanted. I have a good life now. I enjoy every day and think about starting a self-confidence development course for overweight girls. I wish you all to be confident and optimistic. Be yourself.
I have never dated boys, and I have never regretted that. I had a big dream, and I worked hard to make it true. I was young when I realized that I could achieve my life goals using my mind only. So I spent all of my free time studying. I had a plan for the whole life. I knew which university I would graduate from, what my first job would be, how my career would evolve. My ultimate goal was to become a lady president. Catherine was my friend. She was always there to hear me out and support me in achievement of my goals. I felt grateful and tried to help her with her homework or in any other complicated things she had problems dealing with. She was hardworking and tried to do everything on her own. I was happy she could learn fast and that I was helpful, but sometimes she acted weird. After a few failed relationships with boys, Catherine was a little depressed. I did my best to support her, but study was always my priority. Maybe that's why I didn't notice how Catherine started to change. She tried to spend as much time with me as possible. Often took my hand, touched me. I felt it was wrong. I didn't know what to do during those moments, and it made me a bit uncomfortable. I searched for information online and learned that such things happen and that it was normal that another person did not feel the same. However, I couldn't make up my mind to discuss it with Catherine. Meanwhile, she began to make attempts to invite me to the cinema or the park. I noticed she looked at me differently, like the cat from Shrek cartoon. I made excuses, told her I had to study. Then I tried to limit the time we spent together. I thought that it would cool her down, and she might pay attention to boys again. Time went on, and I was going to talk to her to explain that we would stop seeing each other if she kept taking so much of my time, because my dream was the main thing I had in my life. I wanted to formulate the idea in such a way that it could sound better and hurt her less. Catherine was still my good friend. I made it a condition that a week later, I would talk to her. I had an idea on how to explain everything to her. I wanted to begin from a silly joke about a gingerbread man who hung himself. I thought it was funny, and it made me a little more confident. But a day before the date I was planning to talk to Catherine, I received a call from the school psychologist, Miss Nicole. I was worried a little when I knocked on the door of her room. Miss Nicole told me that the day before that Catherine visited her and told her everything about us. She said she couldn't understand what those feelings were and that it was difficult for her to resist them. Miss Nicole also told me that Catherine had an elder sister and that they were very close. Her elder sister used to help her a lot with the study and everything, and then she suddenly died. It was a shock for Catherine. She got depressed and had to work with a psychologist a lot to recover. Miss Nicole also mentioned that I was a catalyst and those feelings of sister love returned. Catherine might have not realized that it was true, and if I stopped being a friend to her, she could face that loss again. And helping her out of her new depression would be a lot more difficult. Miss Nicole offered me to help Catherine. She said I had to act like her sister, be kind to her, pay more attention to her, give her whatever she wanted, and avoid any stress. And maybe, in a couple of years of therapy, she would be able to tear down those associations with Catherine's sister. I couldn't believe it. I lost my confidence again. I started thinking about what could happen if I followed Miss Nicole's advice. I was confused. On the one hand, I wanted to help Catherine, but the prospect of losing 2 years of my life was scary. Besides, I was planning to transfer to another school, a more prestigious one, with deeper learning of politics. I had made such great progress, and I couldn't lose it. What should I do? Follow my dream or help my friend? Please share your opinions. Have you ever made such a difficult choice?
Hi, my name is Bella, and this is my mother. She looks young, wears trendy clothes, and people sometimes think that she is my elder sister. All of my friends say they would like to have such a mother, but I don't think she is a perfect mom. She is a part of my life which is too large. She can easily go to a party with my friends, and such party usually is the worst possible party for me because she attracts all the attention. She is funny, witty, and knows how to communicate with people. In addition to this, she notices how irritated I get, and she does her best to cheer me up, and that irritates me even more. This started in my early childhood, when my mother began to invite my friends to our house. It happened very often, and I think she wanted to help me make friends and learn how to strengthen friendship, because I was a rather shy child at that moment. But the scope of her assistance increased year by year. She showcased the interest in my relations with friends, asked what places we visited, what we talked about, what people I met. My mother frequently said that I could invite my friends home, but if I rejected her proposals, she asked if she could join us. My friends were fond of her very much, and sometimes even said that if my mother didn't come, I should not come either. I felt angry, but didn't say about that to her because I was afraid my friends would change their attitudes to me, or we could fight over it. And making new friends was not an easy task for me. I began concealing the information from her about the new people I met. A couple of weeks ago, I got acquainted with a guy on a dating site. At first, we just exchanged messages, but then decided to meet. We agreed to have dinner at a cozy cafe located far from the city center to avoid meeting any people we might know. He met me near a bus stop, and we moved toward the cafe. He made jokes. We laughed a lot. He seemed to be a great guy, and I liked him. I even laughed to myself that I would introduce him to my mother just before the wedding, not earlier. We entered the cafe, sat at the table, and took the menu, when suddenly I saw a blonde woman's back, which looked familiar to me. It was my mother, of course. She was talking to a man who was a complete stranger to me. I was shocked. I started thinking about an excuse to leave the cafe, but it seemed foolish to interrupt such a good date. Besides, I wanted to know who that man was. I hoped she was interested in him, because if she was, she might spend more time with him and stop paying so much attention to my life. I noticed that my potential boyfriend was looking at me. Trying to understand what was going on, I slouched and was watching her from above the menu as a spy from movies. I realized that while I was thinking about my mother, but he kept telling me something. To stop the date, I told the guy that I didn't feel very well, apologized to him, and promised that we would meet a few days later. He offered to call the ambulance, but I refused. Then I said I had to go and left the cafe. On my way home, I sent him several messages saying that I was sorry and hoped to see him soon. My mother was at a place where I didn't want her to be, even when I didn't tell her I was going there. Was it a coincidence? I really wished to tell her all I thought about her. When she arrived home, I noticed she was smiling. Probably her date was a lot more successful than mine. This thought made me even angrier. I said, "Mom, we need to talk. Honey, can we talk a bit later? I really want to have a shower and relax." "No, either we talk now or I leave this house." She was surprised, but sat down and said, "All right, I'm listening." "You're being overprotective. That's enough. I want more personal space. I want to spend time with friends without you. You always attract all the attention to yourself. I'm tired of all the questions about where I am, who I am with, who I met, and what I did. I want to tell you things when I want to, not when you do." "Okay, it seems to me it's time to tell you everything. I don't want you to think that I am a bad mother. I didn't expect such an answer. It made me feel worried. When I was pregnant with you, your father made friends with some really bad people, did bad things, and finally died. It was a great shock for me. and I nearly lost you too. Since then, I was worried that you might follow in your father's footsteps and have some bad friends either. Of course, I noticed that my actions irritate you, but the fear of losing you is stronger. I have even started visiting a psychologist to stop following you everywhere and give more freedom. I was shocked. I realized that my mother needed more help than I did. We hugged each other and began crying. Has she been right trying to protect me from everything? I don't know. What do you think? Leave your comments.
My name is Victoria, and I'd like to tell you the most horrible story of my life. I grew up as a very curious and active child. My parents often told me off for touching things I was not allowed to touch, so I made sure they didn't know I wasn't always a well-behaved girl. I didn't understand why they were so worried. I used to enjoy playing with a knife and imagine myself being a pirate or a circus girl who threw knives at a moving target. Fortunately, I never injured myself and put the knife back to where it belonged to. No one ever saw me playing with it. I liked the idea that I could just play with something that my parents forbid me to take, and that was my little secret. Once my parents invited their relatives and friends to our house. In the middle of the party, someone left a lighter in the kitchen, which I noticed immediately. I wasn't sure how it worked, but I saw my father's friend lighting a cigarette. Of course, I wanted to try and play with it. I took the lighter from the kitchen and hid in the storeroom. It was easy to understand how to use it. I also found out that the flame volume was adjustable. I imagined myself to be an astronaut in a spaceship which was flying through space, deviating from asteroids and looking for abandoned civilizations. Finally, I was able to find a planet that seemed to have been inhabited. I took a couple of bottles in the corner of the storeroom and turned them into an abandoned spaceport. I started landing. The last thing that I remember was a flash of light, severe burning, and silence. I woke up in the hospital. I was lying in a bed with my body totally covered with bandages. My mother was sitting beside me. Her eyes were full of tears. I could hear my father shouting at someone over the phone in the corridor. It was a long recovery. I isolated myself and didn't want to talk to anyone. At first, my parents didn't worry a lot about that. But when a year passed and nothing changed, they took me to a psychiatrist. By the time I was 14, I made great progress. I felt better. I could talk again, study, even do sports. But sudden flashes and noisy sounds still made me frightened. As for fire, I couldn't even think of approaching to it. I wasn't even able to use the gas stove, so my father bought an electric one to help me with cooking. That day, my mother was arguing with my father about the fact that he couldn't find time to repair the door to the basement where we had a washing machine. It was Saturday, the day my mother did laundry. When I returned from school, I saw smoke coming from the house. I rushed to the front door, opened it, and saw clouds of smoke inside. Smoke was everywhere, but the fire was insignificant. It must have just started. I heard my parents in the basement. The door was closed and they couldn't get out. They were knocking hard on the door and begging for help. I moved towards the door, but saw fire very close to it. I got paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move, but the fire kept spreading. Soon, the entire wall with the door to the basement where my parents were was burning. But I still wasn't able to do anything. My body didn't obey, my head was spinning, and the only thing I could think about was running away. Running away right now. Although I knew that we kept an axe and a fire extinguisher in the storeroom, I couldn't dare to move. Feeling helpless, I closed my eyes. It helped. My fear subsided, and I took the fire extinguisher from the storeroom, and I rushed to the corridor to put out the fire. I directed the fire extinguisher to the places with the most aggressive flame, and it was reducing. I was moving to the door to the basement. At that moment, I realized I couldn't hear the voices anymore. I grabbed the axe and began hitting the lock with it. When it was finally broken, I opened the door and saw my parents. They were still breathing, but couldn't speak. By the time I was already feeling dizzy and could hardly move my legs, I understood that I had to leave the house as soon as possible. I started pulling my parents out of the house, repeating again and again, "Please, hurry, please." But they were nearly unconscious and couldn't move. I was pulling both of them, but I felt I was getting weaker. There was just a few meters left to the porch. I woke in the hospital. I opened my eyes and saw a nurse. I asked her about my parents. She said, "I'm sorry, I'll call a doctor for you." I refused to believe that the worst thing had happened, but the doctor confirmed the fact that my parents had died. He asked me if I had any relatives who could take care of me. I said that I didn't, and then I began crying. I was hysterical, actually. The doctor gave sedatives to me and I fell asleep. When I woke up a few hours later, a man was sitting near my bed. He was holding my hand. I withdrew it and asked who he was. He replied, "Don't be afraid, I'm your uncle." The conversation that we had after that turned my life upside down. He was my uncle, the man who was guilty for the explosion in the storeroom when I was little. He said that I had been playing with his bottles, remember the spaceport, that contained highly flammable substances. My father blamed my uncle for what had happened to me. He was so angry that he cut my uncle from our lives completely, removed all photos, letters, messages, and I was too little to remember him. During all this time, my uncle was tormented with guilt. But when he got the news about the fire and my parents' death, he immediately came to visit me at the hospital. When our neighbors entered the house full of smoke, they found me in the corridor with a fire extinguisher in my hands. I was unconscious. I often think that if not for the smoke, I had had all the chance to save my parents. I lost my parents. I blamed myself and felt miserable. My uncle became my legal guardian and I started living with his family. I spent months in my room without leaving it, but time passed and my pain dulled. Besides, my uncle and his family were really nice people who helped me return to a normal life. I am no longer afraid of fire. Moreover, I decided to become a fire safety officer because the best way to fight a fire is to eliminate all possible causes of ignition. Well, that's the end of my story. Take care of your beloved ones and always follow fire safety rules. Please, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.